At the beginning of Chapter 1, the entire party had been wiped out by an overwhelmingly powerful enemy. One by one, they had fallen, unable to withstand the monster's strength. Standing alone before the growling creature, the protagonist fixed his gaze on it and slowly raised his hand. He began chanting a resurrection spell. As a glowing magic circle formed beneath him, he saw his fallen comrades begin to twitch. The first to rise immediately seized his sword and struck the monster down with a decisive slash. The following day, the party gathered to receive their reward. The girl happily remarked that they had surely earned a huge payout this time. The man beside her agreed, noting that the giant monster had been on the bounty list. As usual, they decided to split the reward evenly. She handed a share to the man who had delivered the final blow, calling him Alan. Then she gave Jose his portion. Finally, she passed a pouch to Licht with a warm smile. Licht thanked her. She commented that ever since Licht had joined their party, they had been completing requests much faster and more efficiently. Jose expressed his gratitude for Licht's resurrection ability, which allowed them to return to life repeatedly, though he admitted that dying was far from pleasant. The girl reflected that if Alan had not invited Licht into the party, their circumstances would be very different now. Alan brushed it off, explaining that he had simply wanted to recruit more members, and it had been pure coincidence that Licht was alone at the time. Licht revealed that he had never shown his ability to anyone before. When asked why, he admitted he had been afraid that evil people might exploit him or that he might be subjected to something terrible. The girl did not fully understand his fears. Licht continued, explaining that because they had treated him kindly, he truly believed it was safe to reveal his power to them. The girl and Jose exchanged awkward glances at his heartfelt words, and she lightly smacked him in a teasing manner, asking if he really liked them that much. She clarified that it was thanks to Licht that they had become nearly undefeatable, and she was genuinely grateful. She also confessed that before learning about his ability, she had thought he was useless. Now, their dream of becoming S-rank adventurers no longer seemed impossible. She asked Alan if he agreed, and he responded that he had high expectations for Licht. Licht nodded in agreement. From that point on, they took on numerous requests. Through constant battles, they gained experience and unlocked new skills. Before long, they had grown strong enough to defeat formidable enemies without relying on resurrection. Later, while seated around a table, Jose remarked that that day's request had been easy as well. The girl added that the enemy had been incredibly weak. Alan told them that such results were only natural. They were already S-rank adventurers. He then handed them a sheet of paper containing their next assignment. Surprised, the girl asked if they were already taking on another one. Alan informed the party that their next request was to investigate a small shrine. It was said to be a simple task with a fairly generous reward. The girl reacted with excitement, clearly pleased by the news, while Licht appeared unusually troubled. Later, they arrived at what seemed to be the entrance of a cave. As Licht observed the surroundings, he noted how barren the shrine was and how cramped the interior felt. Before long, Alan announced that they would head back. The girl expressed surprise at how quickly they were leaving, but then accepted it and informed the others that they were returning. The three of them walked side by side, with Licht trailing behind. As they moved, he was lost in thought. Something about the situation felt wrong. Just as he took another step, he heard a voice asking for his forgiveness. Confused, he turned, only to find a group of soldiers surrounding them, their spears pointed directly at him. He demanded to know what was happening. An elderly man stepped forward and explained that everything would become clear if he read the document in hand. The kingdom had issued an execution order for him. The old man advised him not to take it personally. Licht stood frozen in shock. The soldiers seized him, restraining his arms as he struggled and demanded to be released. He was ordered to stop resisting, and he winced from the pain of their tight grip. Desperately, he questioned whether he had done something wrong. He had paid his taxes and worked diligently as an adventurer. The old man calmly stated that the issue was Licht's skill. Licht was stunned, wondering how they even knew about his ability. The old man explained that such a power was far too dangerous to leave unchecked. While it may have saved many lives, it would become a grave threat if demons were to misuse it. Licht acknowledged the logic but insisted that if they would simply speak to his party members, they would surely defend him. The old man agreed to hear from them. Licht turned to Alan, pleading for him to say something. But Alan walked past him. He quietly apologized, stating that he could not defy the kingdom's orders. He asked Licht to endure this for their sake. Confusion overwhelmed Licht. He tried to reason that if they wished for him to leave the party, they could have simply said so. Alan responded bluntly. In the beginning, they had valued Licht's skill highly, which was why they allowed him to join. However, as Licht himself had seen, they no longer made fatal mistakes or died during quests. His resurrection ability had become unnecessary. The realization struck Licht hard. Alan continued, explaining that in other words, his skill was now worthless to them. Despite that, Licht had continued receiving an equal share of the rewards. It was only natural, Alan claimed, for dissatisfaction to grow within the party. He asked whether Licht could understand that. Licht found himself unable to speak. Alan concluded that this was the full story and told him to accept his fate. If he was fortunate, he might even be buried in the hero's yard, just like the necromancer before him. As the soldiers dragged him away, Licht called out to Alan, then to Shizuku and Jose. Shizuku waved lightly and remarked that she understood how he must feel, but nothing would change by protesting. She asked him not to hold a grudge against them. Licht was left utterly dumbfounded. From the ground, he watched as Alan received a pouch from the old man. A soldier forced him down. The executioner stepped forward and asked if he had any last words. Disoriented and overwhelmed, Licht asked where he was. Licht was informed that he was standing at the execution grounds. The method was simple. The executioner would pierce his heart with a single thrust, then push his body off the cliff. He was assured that it would be quick and painless. Under his breath, Licht muttered an insult. The executioner questioned his remark, then coldly replied that Licht should feel grateful. After all, the method could easily be changed to something far more excruciating. If he valued even this small mercy, he should remain silent. The man added that it was ironic, an S-rank adventurer meeting such an end. Life was unpredictable. Almost mockingly, he suggested wagering on the slim chance of survival. Licht, exhausted and defiant, told him to stop talking and finish it. The executioner raised his blade and, with a casual farewell, drove it straight through Licht's chest. Blood burst forth as pain surged through him. Moments later, he was shoved from the cliff's edge. As he fell, he remained conscious, questioning whether this was truly how he would die. He struck the ground on his back from an immense height. Above, the executioner remarked that his work for the day was finally done. It had been busy, and now it was over. With that, he walked away. Far below, Licht lay motionless. The sky above was clear, the air silent. There was no one else around. No one had bothered to confirm his death. Then, a faint glow appeared above his body. Humanity did not realize it then, nor would they understand it even now, but at that very moment, their greatest mistake had been made. The emptiness in Licht's eyes faded. Consciousness returned. He slowly stirred and pushed himself upright. Staring at his own hands, he struggled to comprehend what had happened. He was certain the blade had pierced his heart. Yet there was no wound. Not even a scar remained. Confusion overtook him. This phenomenon felt familiar. It was identical to what happened whenever he used resurrection magic. But that was impossible. He was supposed to be the only one capable of using that skill. A realization dawned on him. Could his ability still activate even after his own death? If that were true, then even his former party had never known this detail. It was highly possible that someone among them had reported his power to the kingdom. The thought made his teeth grind in anger. He had trusted them completely. For now, he knew he had to leave. He could never return to the Rezaga kingdom. He needed somewhere to hide, somewhere beyond their reach. And so, from the depths of betrayal and death, Licht's revenge tragedy began. Because of the rare skill Licht possessed, he was betrayed by his companions and executed by the kingdom. In a twist of irony, it was that very same ability, resurrection, that brought him back from death. When he regained consciousness, he found himself staring at the water. The sea stretched before him. Despite being officially executed, he had revived. Fortunately, it seemed the kingdom had yet to realize this. Still, he needed a place to hide. In this world, judging by the territories controlled, the ratio of humans to demons was roughly 3 to 7. He recalled hearing a rumor about a suspicious dungeon somewhere near the border. The information was unreliable, coming from no credible source, and he did not even know whether such a place truly existed. Even so, he was alone now. This was the only option left to him. He knelt in frustration, thinking the rumor had been false after all. In irritation, he threw a stone into the water. Instead of the usual splash, it struck something metallic. The unexpected sound made him pause. When he looked up, he saw what appeared to be a door. A door in a place like this made no sense. Yet determination replaced his confusion. Fixing his gaze on it, he leapt toward the structure. Standing before the open doorway, he realized he had found it. Stairs led downward. He entered and continued deeper inside, carefully observing his surroundings. Eventually, he wondered if he had reached the deepest part of the dungeon. Not a single monster had appeared. It was as though the entire dungeon had been shut down. The space was vast, almost excessively so. It felt like a waste. But dwelling on that would change nothing. What mattered now was reviving the dead who slept within this dungeon. If he wished to survive from this point forward, he needed allies. From what he could tell, this dungeon had existed for a very long time. It would not be surprising if exceptionally powerful veteran warriors were resting there. His skill, he believed, could restore the dead regardless of whether their bodies had decomposed. He was using his power in exactly the way that Old Man had once feared, but that no longer concerned him. He chanted the spell of resurrection. A deep rumbling echoed through the dungeon. Suddenly, a strange sensation overwhelmed him, as if his soul were being pulled out instead. This was not the reaction he remembered when reviving humans. His body trembled as a brilliant light filled the chamber. When the light faded, 5 figures stood before him, restored to life. One girl realized she was truly alive and celebrated in disbelief. Another addressed someone called Mao, acknowledging their success. A shorter girl noticed that even their flesh had been completely restored. A childlike figure embraced an elf-like woman, overjoyed to see her again, and the elf expressed the same relief. All of it unfolded directly in front of Licht. Then one of the girls turned her attention toward him, wondering aloud whether the gentleman standing there had been the one who revived them. Mao fixed her gaze on Licht, while he struggled to decide how to respond to the situation unfolding before him. She ordered the others to return to their respective guard posts and ensure that no one approached the area. After giving her instructions, she turned back to him and asked if it was safe to assume that he was truly the one who had revived them. He confirmed that he was. She questioned how he had managed such a feat, explaining that they had been dead for nearly 100 years. Even a necromancer, she noted, would be unable to resurrect someone without a corpse. The mention of a century startled him, and a chill ran down his spine. As he processed the revelation, he noticed the grin spreading across her face. He admitted that he did not fully understand the details himself and that the outcome had been unexpected even for him. For a moment, the two simply stared at each other. Then Mao broke into laughter, remarking that he was quite an interesting individual. She acknowledged that he possessed the genuine ability to bring the dead back to life. She then asked whether he would like to join them. Surprised, he questioned whether it was truly acceptable for him to do so. She replied that it was, adding that he appeared to be in some kind of trouble. Although she did not know the specifics of his circumstances, she wished to lend him a hand simply because he had restored them to life. He expressed his gratitude. And just like that, he found himself becoming a member of the Demon Lord's army. It was not at all what he had imagined would happen, yet he had nowhere else to go. Accepting her offer with thanks was his only real choice. Only then did Mao realize she had not yet asked his name. She introduced herself as Arya and declared that he was free to revere her as the legendary Demon Lord. Licht had not yet spoken with the others, but from what he could tell, they were Arya's trusted comrades. Given Arya's complete confidence in them, they had to be exceptionally capable and powerful retainers. Arya declared that their first objective would be the reconstruction of Dystopia. Although a century had passed, the overall layout of the structure remained unchanged. When Licht sought clarification, wondering if she was referring to the dungeon itself, Arya confirmed it. She further explained that the dungeon was also known by another name, Adventurer Killer. Fortunately, it had been built with such durability that it was still usable even after all these years. Licht asked how he could contribute, modestly admitting that his combat ability was no more than average. Arya playfully reprimanded him, dismissing the idea that she would ever send him into battle unnecessarily. She valued his abilities far too highly for that. Moreover, she hinted that there was someone perfectly compatible with him. She made it clear that she would not assign him to guard any specific section of the dungeon. This left Licht puzzled. The dungeon was vast, yet only 4 individuals were tasked with guarding it. The very fact that such an enormous stronghold was protected by merely 4 people suggested a severe shortage of manpower. He questioned whether Arya had noticed anything unusual about them. Arya replied that nothing seemed out of the ordinary, though she did recall that before their deaths, they always appeared exhausted and had often mentioned that they barely had time to sleep. From this, Licht inferred that the territory they were responsible for must have been so expansive that rest had become a luxury. The realization struck him that Dystopia, infamously known as the Adventurer Killer, had also been an overwhelmingly exploitative place for its own defenders. He proposed that they should reassess the station's operations. Arya responded that if he believed that necessary he should discuss it directly with the others, leaving the matter entirely in his hands. Though uncertain, Licht accepted the responsibility. Later, he made his way to the area closest to the dungeon's deepest point. There, he politely excused himself for intruding upon the lone figure stationed there. The girl granted him permission without hesitation. Despite her calm demeanor, Licht sensed an air of restlessness within himself. Observing her, he remarked that she appeared quite busy. She acknowledged this but explained that restoring everything to proper order brought a profound sense of accomplishment. Her name was Ferris, the overseer of the Hall of Melancholy. When she inquired about his purpose, Licht recalled that she was not human. Being assigned to the dungeon's deepest region implied that she possessed extraordinary strength. He explained that he had heard about the immense workload everyone carried in order to protect Dystopia. His intention was to investigate the situation and, if possible, find a way to reduce their burden. To his astonishment, Ferris suddenly knelt before him, hailing him as a savior, granting him her complete support in addressing the issue. Licht asked Ferris how many areas of the dungeon she was currently responsible for. He was stunned to learn that she oversaw 5 in total. Under normal circumstances, each area of a dungeon would have its own boss monster stationed within it. Ferris and the others were most likely not mere monsters but high-ranking demons. Judging by their presence and bearing, they did not appear to be subordinates either. That only deepened his confusion. Why was someone of her stature managing 5 separate territories alone? It became clear to him that Dystopia's manpower shortage was far more severe than he had initially assumed. Ferris admitted that it was especially stressful whenever enemies invaded. The areas under her supervision were the closest to the Demon King, making the pressure she endured 10 times heavier than elsewhere. Licht remarked that she truly had it rough. Ferris explained that Iris and Tis guarded their assigned territory together as a pair, which inevitably meant even more responsibilities fell upon her shoulders. There was little that could be done about it under the current circumstances. Licht understood that this was not a problem that could be resolved overnight. He suggested that their only viable option might be to fill the vacant sectors with traps, reducing the need for constant direct supervision. Whether or not Arya would approve such a proposal remained uncertain. Ferris mentioned that the Demon King was in a particularly good mood at the moment, so she believed the proposal might be accepted. Moreover, since Licht had been the one responsible for resurrecting them, she was confident Arya would lend him her ear. Ferris' growing excitement was palpable, as though she believed Licht was about to lead a revolution within Dystopia. Later, in the primordial forest, Tis and Iris were resting together, with Iris lying comfortably on Tis' lap. Iris sensed the approach of a visitor and pointed it out. When Tis saw Licht, she acknowledged his presence with mild surprise and apologized for not having prepared anything for him. Licht assured her that there was no need for formalities. From their interaction, he correctly deduced that Iris was the younger sister, while Tis was the elder. Tis asked if his name was Licht. Surprised, he questioned how she knew. She explained that she had overheard his earlier conversation with the Demon King, though she had not meant to eavesdrop. Iris suddenly interjected, confidently guessing that Licht had come to help them address their current predicament. Tis apologized for placing such a burden upon him. Licht clarified that he had come of his own accord to investigate the situation and hopefully lighten everyone's workload. Iris repeated the word burden thoughtfully before asking Tis what they should do. Tis suggested that they at least hear him out. As the conversation progressed, she came to understand that he was genuinely trying to stand up for them. Licht confirmed that the two of them were jointly responsible for their territory, and Tis affirmed this. He then proposed that perhaps they could divide their responsibilities and have one of them manage a different area. Iris immediately refused, clinging tightly to Tis. Tis responded with a gentle smile, explaining that Iris herself was the reason such a division would not work. They were able to display their full strength only when fighting side by side. Separating them would not be realistic. Licht accepted their reasoning. Iris then asked whether he could resurrect the servants. Curious, Licht inquired further, and Tis clarified that the servants were puppets originally created by the Demon King, typically tasked with handling miscellaneous duties. She asked if reviving them would be too much trouble. Licht regretfully explained that he was unable to resurrect beings that lacked a soul, making it impossible for him to bring the puppets back. Tis apologized for having asked too much of him, expressing regret for placing additional burdens on his shoulders. Iris remarked that it would be wonderful if the Demon King were to create servants again. However, Tis explained that the process of creating those puppets had seemed time-consuming and taxing, making it unlikely that the Demon King would repeat it. Hearing this, Licht closed his eyes, a sense of defeat weighing on him. He assured them that he would give the matter further thought. Tis gently reminded him not to push himself too hard and to take care of his health, while Iris enthusiastically encouraged him to do his best. Later, back inside the dungeon, Licht greeted the girl stationed closest to the Demon King's chamber. She identified the location as the Batcave and inquired whether something was wrong. Her name was Rose, a vampire by nature. Ordinarily, a vampire would rest while the sun was up, yet it was clear that she was not sleeping at all. It seemed she had no time for proper rest. Considering that her territory was located near the dungeon's entrance, it was likely that her workload was particularly demanding. Licht explained that he was investigating the severe lack of manpower in Dystopia. From what he had observed so far, the situation was far worse than he had anticipated. Rose expressed mild surprise at his concern and thanked him for his efforts. She admitted that the others did appear to have a difficult time. Compared to them, she almost felt guilty for having it easier. Surprised by her remark, Licht asked how many areas she was responsible for. Rose answered casually that she managed 7 in total. The number left him stunned. Without question, she bore the heaviest workload among them. He remarked that the situation was absurd and insisted that something had to be done. Rose countered that as a vampire, her stamina far exceeded that of the others, so there was no need to worry about her. Still, she admitted with a light smile that it would become troublesome if her workload increased any further. Licht reflected that if the root of the problem was simply a shortage of manpower, then their only option would be to recruit more workers. However, it was clear that they could not simply hire ordinary monsters to fill such roles. As this thought formed in his mind, realization struck him. There was one individual capable of making large-scale recruitment seem effortless, a figure known in every adventurer's tale, the legendary necromancer. That night, Ferris accompanied Licht outside. She gazed around in amazement, noting how drastically the world had changed. Licht reflected that they had, after all, just awakened from a century-long slumber. Ferris pointed out a bridge nearby, certain that it had not existed when they first entered the dungeon. She speculated that Rose must have built it herself. Licht was taken aback to learn that Rose had been assigned such labor-intensive tasks as well. His attention was suddenly drawn to a large wolf standing ahead of them. He tensed, wondering if it would attack. Ferris calmly reassured him that it was not an enemy. The wolf had been charmed by Rose and was likely brought there as a means of transportation. Licht struggled to comprehend the situation, questioning whether the wolf truly posed no threat. Ferris demonstrated by gently petting and embracing the creature, proving its docility. She then invited Licht to climb onto its back. Accepting her reassurance, he mounted the wolf, ready to proceed. As they rode on the wolf's back, Ferris asked whether he knew their destination. Licht replied that of course he did. It would be a serious problem if he did not. In his mind, he reaffirmed that they were heading to the resting place of the legendary necromancer, the hero's graveyard. The site was currently preserved for religious purposes, and the guard presence was said to be minimal. Ferris remarked that if their operation succeeded, they would surely earn more opportunities to rest. She was confident that the Demon King would grant permission. Licht admitted that he had initially expected resistance. He had assumed the matter would turn into a lengthy discussion, especially since he needed to bring one of Arya's retainers with him. Yet Arya had agreed without hesitation. Strangely, that lack of opposition felt almost anticlimactic to him. Ferris then raised a concern. Even if they succeeded in resurrecting the necromancer, would the Demon King truly accept such an individual into dystopia? Licht reassured her that everything would be fine. Though he could not fully explain why, Arya appeared to trust him deeply. Ferris expressed relief at his confidence. With that, Licht urged them forward, warning her that they would likely have to fight the gravekeepers and that she should prepare herself. Ferris suddenly paused, recalling that Licht's ability was the resurrection of the dead. If that were the case, she wondered whether he could revive her as many times as necessary. Licht confirmed that it would not pose a problem. After a moment of contemplation, Ferris seemed satisfied, and they continued on their way. Later, at the graveyard, two guards on night duty sensed their approach. One remarked that a pair was heading toward the grave, while the other expressed disbelief at such timing, especially when only the two of them were present. They resolved to capture and punish the intruders. When Ferris and Licht arrived, she gently petted the wolf and instructed it to remain behind and wait. Together, they approached the hero's graveyard. The gate stood open before them. As they stepped forward, Licht instinctively raised his hand to halt Ferris. In that instant, two men lunged at them from the air, declaring that whoever struck first would win. Licht narrowly dodged the assault, but Ferris was cut down. Shocked, he cursed as she collapsed, laughing even as she fell. He rushed to her side as she reached out weakly before her body went limp. Behind him, one of the attackers suddenly groaned in agony. His companion asked what was wrong, only to hear him complain of unbearable pain. The man staggered before collapsing, blood seeping from his abdomen. The remaining guard called out in alarm, staring at the wound that had mysteriously appeared on his ally. He turned toward Licht, demanding to know what he had done. In that moment, Licht understood. This must have been the ability Arya had mentioned. Ignoring the guard's frantic demands, he focused instead on Ferris. Chanting calmly, he invoked resurrection. Ferris immediately revived, springing back to her feet with enthusiasm and thanking him brightly. Licht admitted that he wished she had informed him about her ability beforehand, as she had genuinely frightened him. The remaining guard watched in horror. Ferris only laughed. Drawing a knife from the guard's own sheath, she pressed the blade to her neck and sliced through it without hesitation. At that same instant, the man's neck was cut as well, as though mirroring her wound. Both fell to the ground, bleeding out. Licht once again went to Ferris and used his resurrection ability, restoring her to life. When she asked what troubled him, he dismissed it as nothing. She then warned that the guards might have summoned reinforcements, urging him to hurry. With no time to waste, the two began searching the graveyard for the tombstone of the legendary necromancer. As they stepped forward, they finally found the tombstone. It marked the resting place of the necromancer Dorothy. After confirming the name, Licht activated his resurrection ability. The earth shifted, and a hand suddenly reached up from the ground as Ferris and Licht watched. The revived necromancer needed help emerging from her grave, prompting Ferris to glance at Licht. Without hesitation, Licht moved to assist and asked Ferris to help him pull her out. Once freed, Dorothy let out a relieved sigh. She remarked that if they had intended to resurrect her, it would have been preferable to dig up her corpse beforehand. Brushing the dust from herself, she accepted Licht's apology with casual grace. She then asked why they had brought her back. Licht explained directly that they wanted her to become their companion. Dorothy examined them carefully, noting Ferris's inhuman nature, and agreed to the proposal. However, she had one important question. Licht did not seem to be a necromancer like her, so she wanted to know what method he had used to resurrect her. There was no sign of a master-servant contract between them, as she had not become his slave. Licht admitted that she was correct. He was not a necromancer. Instead, he possessed a skill called resurrection, which allowed him to bring people back to life. However, the ability did not force obedience. It even appeared that he could resurrect himself. Dorothy observed that his power was quite similar to her own, though she had never heard of a resurrection skill capable of reviving its user. Ferris commented on how amazing Licht was, and he thanked her. Dorothy clarified that all she needed to do in return was become their companion. Grateful for being brought back to life, she promised to do her best to repay the favor. Sensing potential danger, Licht suggested they leave before the Gravekeeper's reinforcements arrived. Dorothy agreed and they departed. Later, at the deepest part of dystopia, Dorothy marveled at the dungeon's immense size. Even if she assigned spirits to guard each section, it would require a considerable number to fully secure the area. When Licht asked whether that made the task difficult, she dismissed the concern. Controlling large numbers of spirits was her specialty. Raising her staff, Dorothy activated her power. After a brief moment, she declared the task complete. The spirits would arrive at every unguarded area within 3 minutes. She was capable of exercising complete control over hundreds of spirits at once. Observing this, Licht reflected that the title of necromancer was clearly well-deserved. Dorothy then asked if she could freely use one of the areas as she pleased. Inwardly, Licht acknowledged that zones guarded only by spirits were weaker compared to those overseen by Rose and the others. However, with Dorothy's support, Rose and the rest could now focus more efficiently on managing and defending their assigned territories. Despite her cooperation, Dorothy admitted she never would have imagined herself working under a demon lord. She also found it curious that Licht, who was human, served under one. Licht explained that circumstances in the human world had left him with no place to return to. There was nowhere else for him but here. Dorothy sensed that whatever had happened to him was painful and chose not to press further. Instead, she remembered that as a newcomer, she should properly greet the demon lord, Mao. Licht reassured her that Arya was likely asleep, so there was no need to rush. More importantly, he suggested that there were others she might find more intimidating to greet first, such as Ferris. Dorothy recalled that Ferris was the girl who had been with Licht earlier. She questioned whether Ferris was truly someone to be feared, as she personally did not find her frightening at all. Licht confirmed that Ferris was indeed dangerous in her own way. If anyone were to attack her, she would retaliate by slitting her own throat. Dorothy found that reaction horrifying. Despite that, she reasoned that since Ferris and the others were now her comrades, she would naturally place her trust in them. However, she expressed that if anything were to happen, she hoped Licht would come to her aid. He assured her that if such a situation arose, he would be there to resurrect her. Dorothy dryly remarked that, if possible, she would much prefer to be saved before dying rather than afterward. Meanwhile, in Alan's room, he was asked whether he had found a replacement for Licht. He admitted that he had not. In the first place, it would be nearly impossible to find a healer capable of matching their level so easily. The question arose as to why that was the case. Surely there had to be at least a few qualified candidates. After all, resurrection was no longer necessary. Any healer capable of treating their wounds should suffice. Alan explained that this was precisely the problem. There was no healer who could truly match them. Every one of them was extremely fragile. No matter how much support they provided from the rear, the moment they stepped onto the front lines, they would die almost instantly. Shizuku questioned whether he meant they would simply need to fight while protecting their healer. After all, they were still an S-rank party, and such prestige should attract plenty of strong healers. Alan clarified that the issue lay with the healer class itself. Regardless of rank, healers were physically weak. Even an S-rank healer was only about as strong as an average adventurer in one-on-one combat. Shizuku was surprised, pointing out that Licht had been reasonably capable in battle. Alan corrected her, explaining that Licht had not actually been a healer. Resurrection was merely one of his skills. That was why his combat ability had been sufficient to stand alongside them. Stunned by the revelation, Shizuku struggled to accept it. Alan then suggested that, for the time being, they should recruit someone to join their party as a decoy. They could use that person as bait if necessary. Shizuku readily agreed, expressing no hesitation about abandoning such a recruit if the need arose. In fact, she mused that they might even be better off without adding anyone new at all. With so many applicants available, they could afford to take their time and perhaps stumble upon an exceptional talent. Her attention was then drawn to a letter addressed to Alan. As she read it, Alan assumed it was yet another request urging them to take on a quest. While that was true, she insisted he should read it carefully. The letter detailed a dungeon investigation request. Reports had recently surfaced of immense magical power emanating from a dungeon that had supposedly remained dormant for years. Shizuku wondered if that meant monsters had begun occupying the abandoned site, which sounded like troublesome work. Alan observed that the dungeon was located right on the border between the human world and the demon world, well within their reach should they decide to accept the mission. Shizuku recalled that this was the same dungeon that had recently become a hot topic due to false rumors claiming a demon lord resided there. The reward for the quest was 500,000 gold. Upon hearing the amount, Shizuku was stunned. With firm determination, she concluded that they had no choice but to accept the request. A few days after Dorothy joined them, life in the dungeon remained unexpectedly quiet. Licht found it surprising that nothing unusual had occurred. Dorothy informed him that the human world had already become aware of dystopia's existence. When he asked how she knew, she explained that she had stationed one of the spirits under her control to patrol the outskirts of the dungeon. That spirit had spotted several humans nearby. Licht had not realized she could use her spirits in such a strategic way. Dorothy admitted she had refrained from ordering an attack to avoid unnecessary trouble. However, she was certain the humans would eventually make a move. At the very least, they had undoubtedly discovered dystopia's presence. Licht calmly responded that they would deal with the situation when the time came and thanked her for the information. He also recalled that Ferris, Rose, and the others were grateful for the support her spirits provided. Dorothy felt pleased to be useful. In the past, she had never found a meaningful purpose for her necromancy, so being able to contribute now genuinely made her happy. She then asked what she should do if fighting broke out. Should she join him in battle? Licht reassured her that it would likely not be necessary. Rose and the others would defeat any intruders before they even reached the dungeon, so he doubted Dorothy would need to act at all. At that moment, Arya arrived, searching for the two of them. Dorothy greeted her politely. Arya mentioned that she had already heard about Dorothy from the others and encouraged her to continue her good work, saying she looked forward to working together. Licht informed Arya that there was a high chance the humans would launch an attack soon. Arya reacted with excitement rather than concern. She grinned, declaring that she would gladly grant their death wish. Cracking her fingers, she announced her intention to confront them personally. However, she added that Rose and Iris would probably eliminate the invaders before any reached her. Dorothy asked whether Rose and Iris were truly that strong. They had seemed like ordinary girls when she had spoken with them. Arya explained that Iris was only powerful when paired with Tis, but Rose was another matter entirely. Rose possessed strength comparable to an orc and would devour every human who crossed her path. The image caused Dorothy to shiver. She quietly asked Licht whether Rose might allow a few enemies to slip past if requested. When he said she probably would, he asked why she wanted that. Dorothy replied that she understood all too well the suffering of being killed by a vampire and genuinely pitied those unfortunate enough to face Rose. Arya then announced she was returning to work, stating she did not particularly care whether there would be enemies left for her to fight. When Licht asked if she was leaving already, she confirmed that she was busy that day. Watching her depart, Licht reflected that although she was not as difficult to read as Ferris, he still had little idea what Arya was truly thinking. Dorothy remarked that she was impressed by how casually Licht spoke to Arya. When he asked what she meant, she reminded him that Arya was, without question, the great demon lord. Meanwhile, deep within a forest, a carriage traveled along a narrow path. Jose questioned Alan to confirm they were heading in the correct direction. Alan assured him that the information had come directly from the guild, making it reliable. As the carriage continued through the forest, Shizuka began to grow impatient, feeling that they had been traveling for far too long. She questioned whether Alan was certain the delay was not simply due to a slow horse. Jose then asked if Alan had obtained any additional information about the dungeon. All they had been told was that a large concentration of magical power had been detected there, which was hardly enough to devise proper countermeasures. Alan told him to calm down. In his view, discussing countermeasures at that point was meaningless. If danger awaited them, it was already too late to prepare for it. Shizuku agreed with Alan, adding that she disliked overthinking complicated matters anyway. Jose warned them not to blame him if something went wrong. Their conversation shifted to what they would do after completing the investigation. The reward was 500,000 gold, and they needed to decide how it would be distributed. One of them suggested splitting it evenly among the 4 members, as they usually did. However, someone else questioned whether it was truly fair for the healer to receive the same share. The effort they put into combat clearly did not match that of a healer. When Shizuku was asked whether she found that acceptable, she firmly stated that she could not. Eventually, they arrived at the dungeon's entrance. The path led underground, which immediately struck Shizuku as troublesome. Jose turned to Alan and asked whether he had brought the escape item. The place gave off an overwhelming sense of danger. With Licht no longer in the party, they could not afford to die. Alan confirmed that he had the escape item with him and assured them he would use it if they found themselves in serious trouble. He told everyone to stay sharp. They instructed the healer to remain close at all times before descending the stairs into the dungeon. As they ventured deeper, Jose sensed something unusual. At first he thought they were devils, but he quickly corrected himself. They were spirits. He informed Alan that the source of the detected magic power was most likely an undead entity, perhaps something similar to a lich. Alan reacted with frustration. Facing an undead opponent at the last moment was the worst possible scenario. They did not have enough stamina to endure a prolonged battle, which meant they would be at a severe disadvantage in a drawn-out fight. Their only viable strategy now was to eliminate the enemy as quickly as possible. The others acknowledged the plan, agreeing that they would move swiftly and finish the battle without delay. Everything in Dystopia was nearly in place. A heavy book landed on the table with a dull thud as Licht wiped the sweat from his brow and let out a tired sigh. Most of the room had finally been cleaned. Dorothy expressed her gratitude for his help, calling him a lifesaver. Licht brushed it off modestly. She explained that her spirits were useless for tasks like cleaning. All they could really do was attack enemies or serve as lookouts. That reminded Licht of something she had mentioned earlier. One of her roaming spirits had spotted humans nearby. According to her, that meant the human world had already become aware of Dystopia's existence. Since then, however, nothing significant had happened. Licht wondered if the humans had concluded that Dystopia was not dangerous after all. Even if they decided to attack, he doubted there was anything he could do in advance to prepare. Dorothy suddenly called out to him, interrupting his thoughts. She informed him that reports had just come in. Humans had entered the world of Dystopia. Licht repeated her words in disbelief. The realization struck him a moment later, and his eyes widened. Meanwhile, Jose, Alan, and Shizuku stood frozen in shock as countless ghosts surrounded them. The sheer number was overwhelming. Shizuku reacted in alarm, unable to believe how many there were. She questioned whether all of this could truly be the work of a single monster. Jose clarified that no one had ever confirmed it was just one. To control this many spirits required immense power. In his estimation, they might be dealing with as many as 10 liches. Alan stared at him in disbelief and demanded to know if he was serious. If there really were 10 liches, they would likely destroy one another before anyone else could. Grinding his teeth, Alan admitted he had no idea what was happening, but he did not particularly care. He ordered the others to listen carefully. No one was to act alone, and they were to stick together at all times. Before they could respond, a woman's voice greeted him from behind. Rose apologized politely, explaining that she had orders to split their group apart. That was why she had brought him to this separate area. Alan spun around in shock, stammering as he demanded to know who she was. Rose did not immediately answer. As he watched her, he suddenly realized that Jose and Shizuku had vanished. She had separated him from the others. Rose then calmly introduced herself by name. Alan assessed the situation. If she was his enemy, she had willingly discarded the advantage of a surprise attack by revealing herself. He concluded that she must be the dungeon's owner and muttered that Jose had completely misjudged the situation. Rose seemed confused by his assumption about the dungeon's owner, stating that she did not quite understand what he meant. However, she clarified one thing: she was his opponent. Alan responded that such a declaration was unnecessary. Drawing his sword, he attacked her immediately. His blade sliced through empty air as Rose evaded effortlessly. In the next instant, the sword vanished from his grasp. Alan frowned in shock, staring at his now empty hand in disbelief. Rose examined the sword she had taken from Alan, remarking that it was a fine weapon and lamenting that it was wasted on a human. She quickly dismissed her own comment, telling him to forget it. Still reeling from shock, Alan angrily demanded to know how she had managed to take his sword. Rose calmly explained that his swing had simply been too slow, so she had borrowed it for a moment. She then tossed the sword back to him. Grinding his teeth, Alan demanded to know who was controlling the spirits. He was certain she was not the one behind it and ordered her to tell him where the real mastermind was. Rose repeated his question thoughtfully. She admitted she did not know the exact location but believed that person was likely with Licht. Alan stiffened at the mention of that name. He questioned why she would say it and wondered whether she knew him. That should have been impossible. Rose responded that the confusion was mutual and asked how he knew about Licht. After a brief pause, she seemed to realize something. Alan stood in stunned silence. Licht was supposed to be dead. The idea that he might still be alive crossed his mind, but he quickly dismissed it as absurd. Deciding it did not matter, he insisted that hearing Licht's name would not make him hesitate. Rose let out a small sigh, commenting that she was beginning to understand how Licht must have felt. She then informed Alan that he had already lost. At that moment, bats began gathering around Alan's hands. He stared at them in surprise as they bit into his flesh. Panic set in as he realized he could not move his body. Rose observed that with her current body, she would not be able to draw much blood from him. Then a thought occurred to her. If she asked Licht to resurrect him after draining him, she could create a perfect, perpetual system. Smirking, she decided she would have to test that theory. Alan hurled an insult at her, but his words were cut short as more bats swarmed over him, covering his entire body. Rose watched with a serene smile as his screams echoed through the area. Elsewhere, leaves rustled underfoot as Shizuku stepped cautiously through unfamiliar terrain. Confused, she tried to piece together what had happened. She was certain she had just entered an underground dungeon. She thought she had glimpsed bats for a moment, and then suddenly both Alan and Jose had vanished. A voice suddenly announced the arrival of a human. Tis calmly acknowledged it, confirming the presence. Shizuku turned and saw two figures before her, Tis and Iris. Iris sought confirmation that they should eliminate the human. Tis affirmed that it was an order from Mao, and they would do their best to carry it out. Shizuku raised her sword, warning the elf-like figures that if they allowed her to leave now, she would pretend she had seen nothing. Iris and Tis exchanged glances. Iris questioned the nonsense coming from the human, remarking that she seemed unaware of her place. Tis gently responded that such behavior could not be helped. She was only human after all. The air grew tense as silence fell between them. Iris activated her spirit control. At her command, spirits surged forward and attacked Shizuku. She swung her sword fiercely, unleashing a barrage of slashes. Her blade cut through the incoming spirits as they lunged at her from all sides. She charged forward, slicing through wave after wave, continuing her relentless assault. Then abruptly she stopped. A cry of shock escaped her lips as she froze in place, staring at the spirits before her in disbelief. A spirit drove its hand into Shizuku's skin. Her body instantly locked in place. She tried to move, but nothing responded. Shock washed over her as she realized she had completely lost control. Her sword slipped from her fingers and clattered to the ground. Frozen and unable to act, she could only stand there helplessly. Iris happily called out to Tis, declaring the operation a success and eagerly seeking praise. Tis smiled gently and commended her before issuing another command for spirit control. More spirits materialized before Shizuku. They drifted closer and began sinking into her body. Pain flared through her as she silently screamed. She realized she had been paralyzed and cursed herself for not anticipating a simultaneous assault. Desperately, she tried to think of some way to respond, but her body would not obey her will. Iris asked what they were going to do with the human. Tis replied that they had not been given specific instructions regarding that. After a brief pause, she suggested they could offer her to Rose. Iris brightened at the idea, praising Tis' ingenuity and calling her a genius. The two exchanged wicked smiles as they looked at Shizuku, who could only return a nervous gaze, powerless to resist. Elsewhere, ghosts roamed the area in large numbers. Jose stood alone, confusion clouding his mind as he searched for his companions. He wondered where everyone had gone. A calm voice greeted him from nearby. Dorothy stepped forward, remarking that it truly was a human, just as she had suspected. Jose studied her face carefully, feeling an odd sense of familiarity. Dorothy flinched slightly under his gaze. Jose reflected that her face resembled someone from the distant past. But that was impossible. There was no way that person could be standing here now. Shaking off the thought, he decided it did not matter. What mattered were the questions he had about this dungeon, though he doubted she would answer them. Dorothy apologized, confirming that she could not provide him with the information he sought. However, she added that she would not make him suffer as the others had. She asked him not to hate her for what she was about to do. Jose tightened his grip on his daggers and exhaled slowly, preparing himself. Before anything could happen, another voice interrupted. Dorothy turned and saw Licht approaching. She asked where he had gone. Licht apologized, explaining that he had just returned from speaking with Ferris. At that moment, Jose caught sight of him. His eyes widened in disbelief as he shouted Licht's name. Licht turned toward him with equal shock, calling out Jose's name in return. Jose stared at him in stunned confusion, unable to comprehend how Licht could possibly be standing there. Dumbfounded, Jose demanded to know why Licht was there. Licht, equally shaken, asked him the same question. His emotions were in turmoil as he questioned why Jose had come to this place. When Jose reminded him that he had asked first, he pressed further, asking whether Licht had not been executed. Licht fell silent for a brief moment before calmly confirming that he had indeed been executed. However, he explained that he had been brought back to life. Jose stared at him, speechless. Realization dawned on Licht. If Jose was here, then Alan must be as well. He asked where Alan was, mentioning that he had a few words he wanted to exchange with him. Jose replied that he would like to know Alan's whereabouts too, questioning whether splitting them up had not been part of Licht's strategy. Licht admitted fault and sighed, touching his chest. His expression then grew serious as he asked Jose whether he had honestly known about the execution order issued against him. After a moment of silence, Jose admitted that he had known. Licht asked what his reaction had been. Jose answered bluntly that without Licht, their party would no longer be as strong. Licht remarked that such a response was typical of him. Jose then insisted it was now Licht's turn to answer. He demanded to know how Licht was still alive and, beyond that, what he was doing in a place like this. Licht repeated what he had already said: he had been resurrected by his own skill. He went further, revealing that he was also the one who had revived the Demon Lord's army. Jose was stunned. He called Licht an idiot and demanded to know whether he understood the gravity of his actions. Reviving the Demon Lord's forces was a crime that would forever be recorded in human history. Once the king learned of this, he would mobilize everything to crush him. Licht responded without hesitation, telling him to bring it on. Though taken aback, Jose accepted the answer. He gripped his weapon tightly and reminded himself that as long as he had the item in his possession, he could instantly teleport outside. He resolved to return to the human world at any cost and report that Licht had joined the Demon Lord's army. Dorothy raised her staff, and spirits materialized, charging straight at Jose. He cut through them swiftly. Then he hurled a dagger that released a thick cloud of smoke. As Licht and Dorothy stared in surprise, Jose vanished from sight. Licht gazed at the spot where he had disappeared, his expression unreadable. Elsewhere, Jose clicked his tongue in frustration. An interference barrier had disrupted his teleportation. He had intended to return to the dungeon entrance but found himself somewhere else entirely. Looking around, he noticed there were no undead in sight. Under normal circumstances, he would have welcomed that, but this dungeon felt far more terrifying than any ordinary one. Ferris entered the area and casually greeted him. Jose was caught off guard. He assessed her quickly. She held no weapon and he sensed no hostility from her. Yet he decided he could not take chances. Apologizing internally, he moved in an instant. Appearing behind Ferris with lethal intent, he slashed her arm with his dagger, then followed with rapid strikes to her neck and chest. Blood splattered from Ferris's wounds as the attack landed. Ferris collapsed to the floor after Jose's assault. He let out a tired sigh, believing the fight to be over. In the next instant, the wounds he had inflicted on her manifested across his own body. Blood burst from his arm, neck, and chest in the exact places he had struck. The backlash took its toll immediately. Meanwhile, in the human world, a royal messenger knelt before the throne. He reported that all communication with the adventurers sent to investigate the dungeon had been completely severed. That could only mean something disastrous had occurred. Although he had harbored doubts from the start, he had not anticipated such a grim outcome. Seated upon his throne, the king of the Risaga kingdom listened in silence. With his hand pressed to his forehead, he regarded the messenger with emotionless eyes. The man continued, stating that it was safe to assume a large number of monsters were lurking inside the dungeon. The king curtly replied that such a conclusion was obvious. The true question was whether those monsters were enemies. If they were, then war would be almost unavoidable. The messenger cautiously suggested broadening their alliances beyond neighboring human nations. Perhaps they should share their information with the elven and dragonkin countries as well. This threat might affect every race, and forming alliances early could prove crucial. The king considered the proposal and agreed. Urgent preparations would begin immediately. Although they had only dispatched an investigation team, the monsters might interpret that action as aggression. Retaliation could come at any time, even as soon as the next day. With firm authority, the king declared that the kingdom must not waver in its resolve. Back in dystopia, Arya released a heavy sigh and remarked that the situation was troubling. Maria asked what the issue was, and Arya greeted Licht as he arrived. She assumed he had already noticed the problem, but he admitted he had no idea what she was referring to. Arya frowned and explained that they had been eating the exact same meals for days. Their diet lacked variety. While it was understandable since they rarely left the dungeon, the monotony was beginning to wear on her. Licht reflected that she had a point. Though no one had openly complained, changing the menu occasionally would not hurt. Arya then pointed out a more fundamental issue: dystopia did not really have a proper cook. The only one with decent skills was Tis. Unfortunately, Iris's cooking was practically inedible. Curious, Licht asked about Arya's own abilities in the kitchen. She admitted she was not very confident in her cooking either. Licht quietly realized that he would likely be of no help in solving this particular problem. Arya suddenly brightened, a sly smirk spreading across her face. She declared that she had just come up with a brilliant idea, one that would solve all of their problems at once. Licht eyed her suspiciously and cautiously asked for confirmation that she was not planning to resurrect deceased chefs to handle their meals. Arya immediately rejected the notion, clearly irritated by the suggestion. After clearing her throat, she enthusiastically revealed her actual plan. They would form alliances with races other than humans. By joining forces with them, they could recruit skilled chefs and secure new sources of food at the same time. Licht considered her proposal carefully. It sounded like she was suggesting something akin to bartering. He admitted it might work but questioned what they could possibly offer in exchange. Arya confidently assured him that she had already thought of that. Dystopia held an abundance of jewels and weapons hidden within its depths, valuable treasures by any standard. Those resources would more than suffice as trade goods. Licht then asked which non-human races she intended to approach. Arya explained that the two closest races geographically were the elves and the dragonkin. Her strategy was straightforward. They would recruit the dragonkin for weapon maintenance and tuning, while the elves would provide food supplies and skilled chefs. As she laid out the plan, a mischievous, wicked chuckle escaped her lips, clearly pleased with her own ingenuity. Arya let out a heavy sigh, her sense of unease plainly visible. She had noticed that their meals had grown monotonous, with the same dishes appearing again and again. In Dystopia, there were simply too few people capable of cooking properly, and the lack of variety had finally worn her down. The food all tasted the same, and she had reached her limit, craving something different. That frustration led her to a decision. Rather than relying solely on humans, she intended to join forces with other races. By doing so, they could recruit skilled chefs from those races and, at the same time, secure new sources of food. She declared that her first destination would be the Elven Kingdom, where she planned to seek the assistance of Iris and Tis. Iris reacted with visible worry, repeatedly calling out to her elder sister as she wondered what course of action they should take. Tis, however, accepted the situation calmly, reasoning that a request from the Demon Lord could not be ignored. Licht, observing the situation, realized that since they would be dealing with elves, Iris and Tis were the only ones he could rely on. As high elves, they were regarded as superior among their kind, and even if full cooperation could not be guaranteed, their presence alone would make negotiations far smoother. Licht also mentioned that successfully recruiting chefs would transform their canteen, filling it with lavish and extravagant meals. Tis was delighted by the idea, imagining the joy it would bring to everyone in Dystopia if the number of chefs increased. Iris, on the other hand, pouted, thinking that Licht could have simply relied on her cooking instead. She considered the Demon Lord quite the gourmet and sought Tis' agreement. Tis acknowledged this, smiling warmly and praising Iris's cooking as delicious, though she teasingly added that it was also unique. Iris, slightly flustered, accepted the remark and resolved to do her best. Later, outside the dungeon, Licht was left stunned by an unexpected sight. Tis casually explained that what stood before them was their pet and even asked if it was not adorable. Iris clarified that it was a legendary beast known as Fenner, affectionately called Funchan. Still reeling, Licht reflected that the mere presence of such a legendary creature might be enough to exert influence over the entire Elven Kingdom. Tis reassured him that the beast was well trained and disciplined, and would not attack without reason. She then wondered aloud whether Licht might be afraid. Licht, though visibly shaken, denied any fear. Tis recalled hearing stories that a Fenner which had once tasted humans was especially dangerous. This prompted Iris to ask whether their Funchan had ever done such a thing. Tis admitted she was unsure, but dismissed the concern, reasoning that Licht could simply revive himself if something happened. Licht, his expression difficult to read, pressed the matter further, clearly uncomfortable with the implication. He made it known that he had no desire to experience having his torso bitten through, even if revival were possible. Tis smiled reassuringly, insisting that there was nothing to worry about, as death would come too swiftly for any pain to be felt. Licht, growing increasingly nervous, protested that this was hardly the issue troubling him. Iris gently tried to calm him, explaining that her elder sister had only been teasing. She then invited him to climb onto Funchan's back. Though hesitant, Licht mounted the legendary beast. Tis observed that the experience was not as dreadful as he had imagined. Still slightly shaken, Licht admitted that while it was overwhelming, the view from atop the creature was undeniably breathtaking. Tis added a cautionary note, explaining that Funchan would become irritable if ridden on an empty stomach and advising him to be mindful of that fact. Licht wished that warning had come sooner and pleaded, for the sake of his sanity, that they never forget to feed the beast again. As they traveled, Iris marveled at the freshness of the air, remarking on how delicious it felt to breathe it in. Tis mused that such sensitivity might simply be proof of her elven nature, though Licht firmly stated that there was no doubt about it. Iris reflected that while life in Dystopia was pleasant, occasionally venturing into the outside world might not be such a bad idea. Eventually, they dismounted and proceeded on foot through the forest. Iris expressed regret that they could not bring Funchan along with them. Tis explained that they had all agreed the creature's presence would only terrify the elves. Licht glanced back toward where the Fenner remained waiting and thought that, given its imposing appearance, anyone might mistake it for an invading force. Tis, meanwhile, reasoned that if they were to negotiate and trade, making a favorable first impression was essential. Their thoughts were interrupted by a sudden rustling sound in the forest. Tis called out to Licht, asking if he had heard it, but he responded in confusion, claiming he heard nothing. Iris, however, confirmed that she had noticed it as well and believed someone was screaming for help. Licht quickly assessed the situation, concluding that the likely culprit was a giant monster. If someone was crying out, they were almost certainly under attack. In a forest such as this, he could think of no one else who would be targeted besides the elves. Tis agreed with his reasoning and stated that it seemed they had unfortunately encountered a giant spider. Once that creature locked onto its prey, escape was nearly impossible. A heavy silence fell over them. After a moment, Licht turned to Tis and quietly wondered whether the three of them alone stood any chance of defeating it. Tis smiled calmly, showing no concern. Whether the enemy was a giant spider or a savage beast, she believed that as long as they immobilized it, victory would belong to them. Licht readily entrusted the task to her, and the three of them hurried toward the source of the disturbance. Upon arrival, they were met with the sight of an enormous spider looming over a fallen girl. Tis fell silent for a brief moment, realizing they might have arrived too late. Iris shared the same grim understanding. The monstrous spider crept closer to the unconscious girl, lowering its head toward her face as if to inspect its prey. Remaining alert, Tis and Iris immediately activated their spirit control. Ethereal spirits surged forward and slipped into the spider's legs. In the next instant, the creature's massive body erupted in a violent explosion. Smoke billowed from its shattered limb as the remains of the spider collapsed before them. Without hesitation, Tis turned to Licht and urgently asked him to resurrect the girl. Licht had already begun casting his magic. Moments later, the girl's eyes fluttered open. Confusion filled her expression as she struggled to comprehend what had happened, believing she had already died. When she noticed the spider's lifeless body, shock overtook her. Tis gently embraced the trembling child, reassuring her that the monster had been defeated and posed no further threat. The girl gazed at her in awe before returning the hug. She then wondered if Tis had also been responsible for restoring her life. Tis clarified that while they had slain the spider, it was Licht who had resurrected her. Overwhelmed with gratitude, the girl suddenly knelt and pressed her forehead to the ground in thanks. Iris suggested that they ask the girl to guide them while they had the opportunity. Startled, the girl asked where they wished to go. Licht explained that they sought the Elven Kingdom and admitted there were many uncertainties they hoped she could help clarify. Determined to repay her saviors, the girl eagerly accepted the role, declaring that she wished to be of assistance. Licht thanked her warmly. The girl introduced herself as Lyrica. She looked at the trio with admiration and excitement as Licht introduced himself and identified Iris and Tis as high elves. Lyrica reacted with astonishment upon hearing this, marveling at their beauty and confessing it was her first time meeting high elves. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm, while Licht observed the exchange with mild awkwardness. Before long, the Elven Kingdom came into view. Iris was deeply impressed by its splendor. Tis observed that the entire kingdom was embraced by forest, bathed in gentle sunlight filtering through the trees. She agreed with Iris's admiration and remarked that if this was the kind of environment awaiting them, she would not mind visiting repeatedly. For the moment, she felt no desire to leave her spot, asking Licht if he felt the same. He agreed wholeheartedly, admitting he could remain there peacefully for at least another half hour, content simply to enjoy the atmosphere. Their quiet appreciation was interrupted when Lyrica called out to Licht. Concerned, Tis asked what was wrong. Lyrica explained that she had already reported everything about them to the princess, who now wished to meet and speak with them personally. Licht was taken aback by how smoothly events were unfolding and felt a flicker of anxious anticipation. Lyrica then directed their attention toward a tree house in the distance, explaining that the princess was waiting for them there. Lyrica informed them that the princess was waiting inside a tree house nearby and assured them that the path was straightforward, though she wished to accompany them nonetheless. Iris gazed at the towering tree in amazement and remarked that she wanted one just as grand in dystopia. Tis agreed that it would indeed be wonderful and casually suggested they could submit a request to Rose. Licht immediately urged her to abandon that notion, inwardly worrying that if Rose's workload increased any further, she might suffer a mental breakdown. Setting the jest aside, Tis gently reminded Iris to behave properly and to refrain from saying or doing anything disrespectful in front of the princess. Iris obediently agreed. Licht then attempted to test her understanding by asking who was more respectable between Tis and the princess. Iris proudly answered that her elder sister was, prompting Licht to exclaim in frustration that she had completely missed the point. Determined to correct this, he rephrased the question, asking who was more respectable in this situation. This time, Iris answered that the princess held that position. Satisfied, Licht steered the conversation toward their purpose. They were here to negotiate, offering jewelry and weapons in exchange for something of value from the kingdom. Tis praised Iris for delivering the explanation flawlessly, expressing her delight, which caused Iris to blush and let out a proud chuckle. Tis apologized to Lyrica for the delay, but Lyrica assured her it was no trouble. Iris then quietly asked what might happen if the princess took a dislike to them. Tis considered the possibility and suggested that the demon lord might end up sulking. Licht found that scenario troubling, imagining her isolating herself for an extended period. Drawing in a deep breath, he reflected on the risks they faced should negotiations fail. The thought steeled his resolve. They had to succeed at all costs. With renewed determination, they entered the room. Inside, they found the princess kneeling gracefully, her head bowed in formal greeting. When she lifted her gaze, she welcomed them warmly and introduced herself as Arsh. Licht expressed his gratitude for the hospitality. Princess Arsh explained that Lyrica had already informed her of everything, including how they had rescued her from the giant spider's fangs. She apologized for not conveying her gratitude sooner and confessed that she did not know how to properly repay them. The giant spider had long terrorized their people, and despite their desperate efforts to devise a solution, none had succeeded. They had never imagined the matter would be resolved so suddenly. Licht smiled sincerely in response. The princess then confirmed that he was Licht, and upon receiving his affirmation, she thanked him once more for what he had done for their kingdom. She added that she understood he had an important matter he wished to discuss. Licht stiffened slightly but acknowledged it. Iris then clearly stated their intention. They hoped to borrow some of the finest and most capable individuals of the noble elven kingdom, offering in return the jewelry and weapons in their possession. Licht turned toward Iris in visible surprise after her bold declaration. A heavy silence settled over the room, only to be broken by the princess's soft laughter. She remarked that they were exceedingly pleased with the offer of jewelry, as her people were particularly weak against such treasures. Licht laughed along, only for her to reveal that she had merely been teasing him. Realizing they had once again been toyed with, Licht acknowledged the jest inwardly. Princess Arsh then spoke honestly. Many among her people had long expressed a desire to explore the world beyond the confines of their forest kingdom. If the arrangement was temporary employment rather than permanent relocation, she believed there would be no shortage of volunteers. Licht reacted with genuine surprise at how smoothly the discussion was progressing. However, Tis interjected, noting that they should not allow the agreement to become entirely one-sided. Licht immediately agreed, understanding the importance of balance in negotiations. After a brief silence, the princess proposed a condition in return. She asked that they eliminate hostile outsiders threatening the kingdom, just as they had done with the giant spider. The Elven Kingdom, she explained, was not fond of violence and preferred to avoid bloodshed whenever possible. Iris confidently remarked that such a task would be simple. Tis calmly affirmed this before turning to Licht for confirmation. He readily agreed, finding the terms more than acceptable. Inwardly, he reflected that with a demon lord in dystopia who had been itching for battle, fulfilling such a request would hardly be difficult. Princess Arsh then promised to promptly send several of her capable young people to them, assuring Licht that they were well-behaved and would not cause trouble. She requested that her sincere gratitude and regards be conveyed to the demon lord. With mutual smiles and courteous bows, they concluded their meeting and took their leave. Lyrica waved them goodbye as they departed. Outside the Elven Kingdom, Licht remarked that the princess seemed like a genuinely admirable person and mused that Arya might benefit from learning a thing or two from her. Iris immediately rebuked him for speaking so carelessly. Tis gently defended the demon lord, pointing out that Arya possessed her own admirable qualities. She then mentioned something curious. Arsh had asked them to pass along her regards to the demon lord, yet they had never explicitly mentioned her during the conversation. Tis wondered aloud if she had simply misremembered. The three of them fell into thoughtful silence before ultimately dismissing the matter. Satisfied with their success, Licht reflected that they had somehow managed to secure an agreement with the elves. Their next objective would be the dragonkin. On the next day, within a vast and barren canyon, a figure soared swiftly through the sky. Rose remarked that she did not quite understand why, but taking a walk outside left her feeling unexpectedly refreshed. She asked Licht whether he felt the same. He agreed, sensing the same exhilaration. Encouraging her, Licht suggested that she should consider taking breaks from her work more often. Originally, he had planned to visit the dragonkin village alone, yet Rose had insisted on accompanying him. Only a few days earlier, the notoriously work-obsessed Rose had completed her duties in record time. Licht suspected that her eagerness to join him stemmed less from a desire to rest and more from her inability to remain idle. As they flew, Licht reflected on how unimaginable it once seemed that he would ever soar through the sky like this. Rose responded that flying was genuinely thrilling once experienced firsthand. As they soared through the open sky, Licht turned to Rose with a lingering concern. He questioned whether it was truly safe for her to be out under direct sunlight, given that she was, in essence, a vampire. Rose dismissed the worry without hesitation, explaining that the era when sunlight posed a weakness to her had long since passed. She flashed a proud grin, clearly pleased with how far she had evolved. Licht accepted her answer, reassured. After a moment, Rose recalled something important and asked what their first course of action should be upon reaching the dragonkin village. She also wondered how they ought to respond if they were suddenly ambushed. Licht considered the possibility carefully. If they were attacked, he concluded, retaliation would not be an option. Rose reacted with confusion at that stance, struggling to understand why they would refrain from defending themselves. Licht clarified that their objective was to persuade the dragonkin to manufacture armor and weapons for them. Building a cooperative relationship was essential. Hostility, even in self-defense, could jeopardize negotiations. This strategy, he reflected, had been advised by Arya. Since dystopia had only recently been restored, it lacked the facilities necessary to produce its own arms and armor. Licht reasoned that if they could establish friendly ties with the dragonkin, even if they did not relocate to dystopia, they might at least agree to accept commissioned metalworking projects. To ensure he could properly capture their attention, Licht had even requested to borrow one of Arya's treasured weapons for this very mission. Rose's voice broke his train of thought as she announced that the dragonkin village had come into view. She urged him to hold on tightly. Without warning, she embraced him firmly as they plunged downward from the sky. They landed safely on the ground below, though the sudden descent left Licht visibly shaken. The wings that had carried them transformed into a bat midair, which then returned neatly into Rose's necklace. She declared their arrival with excitement, while Licht responded with a somewhat unsteady acknowledgement, still recovering from the dramatic landing. Elsewhere, near a quiet lake within the village, a woman bearing a lizard-like tail suddenly flinched. She glanced over her shoulder as if sensing something unusual. The man accompanying her noticed her reaction and questioned what had caught her attention. The man asked Lauka what was wrong. Lauka replied that it was nothing. She had simply felt a bad premonition for a moment, but it had already passed. The man looked at her in confusion. Lauka apologized and suggested that they call it a day. The man quietly listened before agreeing, saying that it was probably best, especially since they needed to return early. Lauka agreed, reminding him that their mother was in critical condition. They stepped out of the water, put on their shoes, and began walking home. Lauka asked her brother whether he thought their mother would recover anytime soon. Her brother reacted with disbelief, reminding her that she must not show any signs of weakness. Lauka sighed and admitted that she understood, but she had noticed their mother eating less and less over the past few days. She suggested that perhaps they should seek someone capable of using healing magic. Her brother replied that it would likely be pointless. While there were spells to heal wounds, he had never heard of magic that could cure illness. Lauka conceded that he was right. Her brother said they would head back for now. Lauka expressed a faint hope that their mother's condition might improve by the time they returned. With that, they made their way home. Meanwhile, in the dragonkin settlement, Rose muttered about the place, trailing off before remarking that calling it a village suited it better than calling it a kingdom. Licht observed that the dragonkin population appeared much smaller compared to humans. Rose wondered what they should do next and suggested raiding them, but Licht immediately questioned the idea. He explained that under the circumstances, they needed to initiate a conversation. He proposed finding a dragonkin walking alone, reasoning that a lone individual would be more likely to listen. If they encountered two or more, there was a strong possibility that the dragonkin would immediately attack to gain the upper hand, especially if they believed they could win. Rose soon announced that she had spotted someone. They observed the figures and saw two young dragonkin. Licht noted that neither appeared to be carrying weapons and that no other dragonkin were nearby. Concluding that they had little choice, he decided they would proceed. The two dragonkin turned toward the voice that greeted them in the evening. The younger brother warned Lauka that humans had appeared. Lauka told him to stay on guard. She identified the man as human but sensed that the woman was not, detecting an ominous presence emanating from her. Cain set down his basket and angrily demanded to know what business the humans had there, declaring that it was no place for people like them. Licht calmly responded that there was no need for hostility, as they were not enemies. Licht explained that they had only come to barter. Cain immediately demanded to know whether he was a merchant and angrily declared that humans possessed nothing the dragonkin considered valuable. He warned that if they retreated now, the matter would be overlooked. In response, Licht raised his sword and told them to examine it first. Holding the blade firmly with both hands, he presented it before them. Lauka and Cain stared in stunned disbelief, their jaws dropping at the sight. Cain, overwhelmed with shock, questioned how a human could possibly possess such an extraordinary weapon. Silence fell between the siblings as they exchanged glances. Cain reasoned that if this human carried such a remarkable sword, perhaps he might also possess medicine capable of curing their mother's illness. Lauka urged him to be realistic, yet admitted it might still be worth asking. Gathering himself, Cain called out to Licht and posed a hypothetical question. If they were searching for medicine to cure an incurable disease, would he happen to have such a remedy? He added that if Licht did possess it, they would pay any price. Licht repeated the word, medicine, in thought before turning to Rose and asking whether she had brought any. Rose apologized, explaining that she had only brought garlic. Licht reacted in disbelief, wondering why a vampire would carry garlic of all things. Cain then explained that their mother was bedridden and in desperate need of medicine. He said that even if Licht did not currently have it, he could return later once he obtained some. Licht fell silent for a moment before stating that he might actually be able to cure her. Startled, Cain demanded to know what he meant and how such a thing was possible. Licht replied that he could use his skills, adding that if they brought him to their mother, he might be able to help. Cain insisted that if he truly possessed such an ability, he would have to prove it first before they could trust him. Unsure how to demonstrate his power, Licht's gaze fell upon the fish inside their basket. He proposed an idea and proceeded to draw a magic circle directed at the basket. When the circle faded, the previously lifeless fish suddenly opened their eyes and began flopping and splashing about as though revived. Cain and Lauka stared in utter shock. Cain called out to Lauka, asking if she was witnessing the same thing. Lauka realized that this person might be their savior, while Licht silently observed their stunned reactions. Their thoughts were interrupted by voices announcing that they had returned home. Two men approached, noticing the unfamiliar humans. They questioned who the strangers were. Lauka explained that the two before them might be capable of curing their mother. The men reacted in confusion, asking whether she was certain they were not simply ordinary travelers. Lauka firmly assured them that both she and Cain could guarantee these were no ordinary humans. One of the men asked again if she was serious, and she confirmed it without hesitation. Accepting her conviction, the man turned to Licht and asked whether he truly had the ability to cure her. Licht responded that he would need to examine her condition first. He then stepped forward and approached the woman lying on the bed. Rose quietly asked Licht what was wrong. She suggested that the woman would return to good health if he simply resurrected her. Licht admitted that there was a problem. In order to resurrect someone, the person first had to die. He confided that he had no way of killing her discreetly while surrounded by so many watchful eyes. No matter how he considered it, there was no feasible way to carry it out unnoticed. If he did anything suspicious, they would attack him immediately. At the same time, he realized that if the treatment succeeded, he could earn their trust. Rose then asked him to leave it to her. Though confused, Licht watched as she leaned toward the sleeping woman. Rose parted her lips and bent down toward the woman's neck, biting into it. Theon immediately protested, demanding to know what the girl was doing. Licht, suppressing his anxiety, told him to wait and explained that she was checking the woman's pulse. He added that the treatment method varied depending on the pulse rate, making the procedure essential. Without it, they would be unable to proceed properly. The man accepted the explanation and apologized for interrupting. Licht's heart pounded with tension as silence filled the room. Moments later, Rose informed him that it was done. Licht acknowledged her and slowly stepped forward. Raising his hands toward the woman, he drew a magic circle and cast the resurrection spell. The woman, who had been lying in deep slumber, suddenly opened her eyes and sat up. Cain cried out in shock, unable to believe what he was seeing. Lauka covered her mouth, overwhelmed, realizing that the human had truly cured her. The woman addressed Cain and Lauka, saying that the pain in her body had completely vanished. She asked what had happened. Cain and Lauka rushed to her side, tears streaming down their faces as they embraced her with joy. Lauka happily declared that the man before them had healed her. The woman turned to Licht and admitted that she did not understand how he had done it, but she felt perfectly fine now. Covering her mouth politely, she apologized and confessed that she had not caught his name. Licht introduced himself and rose, expressing his pleasure at meeting the woman. Overwhelmed with gratitude, she bowed her head in tears and thanked them both, unsure how she could ever repay their favor. Cain and Lauka smiled through their own tears as they listened. The woman explained that dragonkins always repay kindness twice over and encouraged them to request anything as a token of gratitude. Seeing an opportunity, Licht asked for assistance in manufacturing weapons and armor, hoping to borrow the dragonkin's special skills for the task. The man responded with surprise and relief, remarking that this was a simple request and that crafting weapons would be child's play for them. He called Cain to back him up, but Cain admitted it might not be that easy and asked Licht to show the sword once more. Licht presented the weapon, and the two men exclaimed in astonishment. Licht assured them that he would provide all the materials needed and asked if they could trust him to handle the manufacturing. The man called Cain and Lauka over, telling them to prepare themselves, as things were about to get busy. Cain, energized, promised that they would certainly return the favor, and Lauka nodded in agreement. With that, Licht had successfully forged a solid and trusting alliance with the dragonkin. By forming pacts with both the elves and the dragonkin, Dystopia now had access to a much wider range of opportunities and resources through these two races. On top of that, they could potentially muster an army in case of a crisis. Unbeknownst to Licht and his companions, however, the humans were secretly pursuing the same goal for their own purposes.